Welcome to episode 15 of the Aha Moment. I am your co-host, Amanda Kaczurka, here with my fellow co-host, Elizabeth Cipolla, and we are very excited to launch our 15th episode with you today.
So we are excited to be joined here today by a very special guest. Jim O'Connor from Phillips Lytle and your Buffalo office is here to really help our listeners learn how to navigate and even what to be thinking about as it pertains to being a Pennsylvania state employer with employees who work in New York State. And there's a lot of little nuggets of information that you might not even realize you need to know. So that's what we're excited to have Attorney Jim O'Connor join us today and talk about.
So Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thank you very much.
And before we jump into today's content, which I think is extremely valuable because, as we all know, labor laws in New York, very complex, lots of ins and outs, constantly changing. So for especially Pennsylvania-based employers who maybe don't know what they don't know, this is going to be a very informative episode for them today. But before we jump into that, could you tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you became kind of a go-to expert in this topic?
Absolutely. Happy to. So thank you for having me. This is very exciting. I do watch your podcast. Sorry I can't be there in person, but happy to be here. So I'm Jim O'Connor. I'm a partner at Phillips Lytle. We have 9 offices across New York State and the Northeast. I am based out of our Buffalo office, and it's a really great firm. We've got 170 attorneys last count, and are expanding through the Midwest. And as part of that, we're getting clients and people we work with who have multiple state employees and are opening their own offices in New York. And so that's why I think it's really great fit for us to be doing this today, and is quite topical, at least in my world. But I am a commercial litigator by trade. So I cut my teeth doing business torts and contract disputes, trade secret disputes, any lawsuit involving one business against another. And after a few years of that, I still do a lot of that, but I really started to enjoy labor and employment. And now I'd say that's probably the vast majority of my practice is labor and employment issues. So I deal a lot with, in larger companies, folks in the HR department, employee benefits. For my smaller mid-sized clients, I'm dealing with the CEOs, the business owners, any C-suite employees, and helping them navigate these intricate employment laws. And I'm seeing a lot of clients struggle when they're trying to expand into New York State market. And, based on my location and some of my client base, one of the big things I'm seeing now is Pennsylvania-based employers, particularly in Erie, who see the opportunity right up the 90 to open up into Western New York and beyond, which is great. That's great. But there's quite a lot of differences between PA law and New York law in the employment world. And I can't tell you how many times I have conversations with my Pennsylvania employers, and they're saying, "Are you serious? Like, are you kidding?" And I have to say, "Yeah, this is real. This is the actual law here in New York," and they are often dumbfounded by that and astounded. So,
speaking of dumbfounded and astounded, we'd be remiss not to mention, Jim, you have no idea, but the window washing crew is...
Oh, they're right there.
Immediately behind you. They just sort of came up
I know. As you
Rose
were
up
talking,
out of the abyss. And
It's too bad we weren't talking about OSHA laws and employee
I
safety.
know
that would have been great
that would
timing.
have been great.
You
So
can't make this up.
you cannot make this up.
That's hilarious.
But I didn't want you to think, Jim, as you were speaking and we were snickering. While yes, you are very fun and funny as a person on a personal level, we were laughing at the irony with the timing.
That is funny. Okay.
So, do you mind, Jim? I want you to go back to something you just shared in your intro, and you had mentioned that you're working with a lot of employers who are based out of, Erie in particular, and they realize they need help. Now, this question might seem kind of silly, but let me put it this way. When do you recognize these employers, these Pennsylvania-based employers? What patterns are you noticing in terms of at what point are they reaching out for help, and compare that to ideally when is best for them to reach out for help?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer, unfortunately, is they're all reaching out too late. Sometimes it's after you get a compliance issue or a notice of violation from the Department of Labor. And at that point, we can absolutely help. There are things that can be undone, but it's much better and makes everything go smoother if you're reaching out for help before you're entering the market here in New York. So what I usually say is, when should someone call you? After they've hired an employee in New York? And my answer is always, it's already too late. They should have called before they hired. And one of the reasons for that is New York has a pay transparency law that is the first in the nation, that requires your job postings and your advertisements to include a good faith estimate of what you expect to pay for that position, and it must be included in the advertisement.
Mhm.
So if you've hired someone in New York and are reaching out for help now, my first question is, okay, how did you find this person and hire him or her? And if the answer is, we posted something on Indeed or one of the other job posting sites, I always say, let me see that posting, because we may be starting off on the wrong foot here if the posting didn't include a salary range.
Mhm.
So early and often is a good motto, I'd say.
Mhm.
So thank you for answering that. I another thing, and this is probably a good segue to ask this next question, which is, by comparison, what is it about New York State's labor laws that, in your professional, expertise, makes them especially complex compared to, today we're comparing it to Pennsylvania, but compared to Pennsylvania
Sure. So
laws?
I'd say two things. First is the sheer number of laws in New York that cover all aspects of employment that you may not expect would be covered by an actual statute or a law or regulation. And then the second thing would be the fact that they change so frequently here in New York. That is something that is unique, in my experience, to New York. And I have clients from not every state in the union, but close to it. And it's by far the most challenging piece in New York is how often they are changing. I give a quarterly update to a local HR organization, and every quarter I have new things to share with them. And again, they are usually most likely going to be not happy with the news I have to share, because it's a lot of compliance and a lot of tracking and administrative work, and it continues on, and there's really no end in sight as far as I can tell, and I've been doing this for almost 12 years now.
Mhm. We have, I know a lot of the clients that we have come from various size businesses, but many are small to mid-sized family-owned businesses, right?
Yes.
And they're trying to operate by, not having a true HR executive or having someone that's more of a transactional administrative support person handling HR responsibilities. My question for you is, can you maybe speak to some of the more common hypothetical situations of where employers such as this, who have employees working in New York State, but they're based out of Erie. Can you explain some of the more common hypothetical situations where these employers think they're doing everything right, only to later find out they're not? What are some of the most common landmines?
Sure. So first and foremost would be the advertisement and the job posting, as I mentioned. The second thing would be the amount of paid leave that New York employees are entitled by law to take, is something that's not unique to New York, but it's certainly not the case in Pennsylvania. There are some cities and counties that have paid leave laws, but there's no statewide paid leave in Pennsylvania. New York, on the other hand, does have some of the strictest paid leave laws in the nation. And it is not limited to sick days. There is a whole enumerated list of reasons why someone can take paid sick or safe leave. And it includes things like if the employee or a family member of the employee is either sick or going to be seek a diagnosis, checkups, or if they are the victim of domestic violence or a family member is the victim of domestic violence, employees are entitled to have time off, paid time off, for things like going to court to get a protective order or going to a shelter or seeking counseling from any number of resources that we have here in the state. And most employers are happy to give time off for that to their employees, but they are surprised when they learn that that time needs to be paid in New York in most circumstances. Additionally, there's leave for all sorts of things, paid leave. There's leave for time to go vote in New York, which is something that is unique to New York State. And I think that the employers are often surprised when the employees raise these issues to them, because New York does a good job, for better or for worse, of alerting employees to their rights.
Yes.
And making sure that they're aware that they have these rights. And so employers who are opening new offices or field offices here in the great state of New York are peppered with questions, particularly at the beginning of their expansion. And those questions are, where's my paid sick leave? Where is my paid family leave? There are lots of things that are unique to New York that Pennsylvania employers simply just don't have yet.
So I know we've had conversations about this with various clients, and we've heard things over the years such as, well, we're so small, it'll be fine, or we only have 2 or 3 people working in New York State, so it's fine.
One person.
Yeah, we only have one person working in New York State. Or another common thing that we've heard is, I'm not going to offer that to the rest of my employees here in Pennsylvania. I'm not doing it. I'm not offering paid leave. I can't, because then everyone else in Pennsylvania is going to expect it. Respond to some of those. I'm sure you've heard those sorts of responses as well.
Oh yeah, yep. And the answers really are case specific. They depend on employer size is definitely a consideration. I would never ever advise not to strictly follow New York state law, but it's a real consideration of when my cross-border employees start to talk to each other, and employee A is mentioning that he or she is taking all of this time off and is paid for it. And my other employees here in Pennsylvania are, understandably so, a bit miffed by that, right? And so if it's at all possible, what I usually advise is, if you can do it, offer it to your Pennsylvania employees as well. And the reason being, morale and employee retention, it's much more expensive to go find an employee than it is to just retain one and train them and keep them happy. If, and it's a big if you can swing it, when you're creating your policy or your handbook for your New York employees, have the benefits work for your Pennsylvania employees as well, who most likely have, been there for years with you and are loyal. They will appreciate that, and you will get the benefits of that tenfold returned to you. In my experience, there are times where they'll say to me, Jim, if I do that, we can't keep the lights on. Right?
Exactly. Sure.
And then the answer is upfront, transparent. Messaging is critical. Tell the team, we're opening a new office in New York. It's very exciting. We think there's lots of opportunities here, and the company is going to do great. And then also mention that you may notice there are additional benefits or rules applicable to your New York coworkers, and just know that we are following New York state law to the T. And that way it's clear to your home base, I'll call it, your Pennsylvania employees, it's clear that you're not doing this because you like your New York employees any more than them. You're doing it because you have to. And if you don't, the New York State Department of Labor will come in and audit, and they can issue orders, ceasing operations, most importantly, fines. They can issue hefty fines. And my experience with the Department of Labor is that once you are on their radar, they will have a bee in their bonnet for you, as they say. And if you, alternatively, if you're proactive in following the rules as you're entering into this market, you will fly under the radar, and you will only have issues 9 times out of 10 if there's a complaint. They do random audits. That is a possibility. Given the number of employers in the state compared to the number of Department of Labor investigators, your chances of being randomly audited are not great. But your chances of an employee complaint in New York are high if you're not following the rules. Even if you're following the rules, a disgruntled employee may file a complaint. And my experience is that once the department has opened your books and looked into things, you are, I don't know this to be true, but it's like you're on a list now. And every so often they reach out and check in, and you don't want that kind of scrutiny. You want to just focus on serving your clients and customers, or producing your material, or whatever it is that your business does. Focus on that and let us worry about the legal side of things.
I have a minutia detail question to ask that, again, I'm drawing from actual questions that we have been asked by business owners operating based out of Pennsylvania with a contingency of employees in New York State. And one of those is, I'm going to go back to, you mentioned it several moments ago, having to do with paid family leave, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen here in Pennsylvania.
Right. Yep.
And a lot of times we'll be asked questions, well, where does the money come from to pay them? And then when we enlighten them as to money that's supposed to be withheld from, payroll, they just look at us with a blank stare. Well, I haven't been doing that. I haven't been doing that for any of my New York State employees. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
So, and another thing we hear is, oh, I'm sure our payroll processing company, they would have told us if we really needed to do that.
Yeah.
That's a common thing we've heard. So can you maybe?
Sure. Yeah. So you would hope that they would catch that. It's not always the case. But yes, you are correct. Paid family leave in New York State is funded through payroll deductions. Each employee contributes, whether they know it or not, a small amount of his or her paycheck towards this fund that funds the insurance that provides paid leave benefits. Now, in New York, those benefits are 67% of an employee's wages up to a certain cap. And that cap, it started out, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it started out at, say, $60,000 a year, and it every year has gone up another 3,000, 4,000, and it's not going to ever go down. I'll tell you that.
Right.
So it's constantly growing, and but the reasons one can take leave in New York for paid family leave are different from the federal FMLA. So in the federal FMLA, which is unpaid, you could take that leave for your own serious health condition. In New York, paid family leave is not for that. That's what you would use your paid sick leave for. But paid family leave in New York is if you are caring for a family member who has a serious health condition. And the definition of family member is in the statute, and it's very specific. Talk about minutia. There are certain categories that qualify and certain ones that won't. You're also able to take paid family leave for bonding with a newborn, and that can be taken at any point within the first year. And that applies to natural children, adopted children, foster placement, and applies equally to both parents. And there's also a paid family leave availability for certain military families. But to answer your question, people expect that their payroll companies will just automatically do that. And my experience has been that sometimes happens, but not always. And the big thing in New York is that is not a defense to a Department of Labor issue. You can't just say, well, our payroll company screwed this up. The employer is going to be liable for those mistakes, regardless. Now, you may have a claim that you could bring against your payroll company after the fact, after you pay your fine to the New York State, but you'd have to fund that complaint. You'd have to litigate that complaint. There's a risk involved. You may not recover it. So that's why it's always best to touch base with your lawyer and your HR professionals before you're entering into the market. And if you've already entered the market, it's good to have a compliance checkup, an audit periodically. And those things are, the pushback that sometimes we get is we don't have the resources for that or the time for that. And, the answer to that question is usually, okay, but what about if and when there's an issue, right? The potential spend is in the tens of thousands if an issue is raised by the department, whereas it's going to be a lot less on the front end to do these periodic checkups. It's kind of like a person. You go get a checkup once a year at your doctor. to check on your health. And yes, there's a cost each time you do that. But if you don't get a checkup for 10 years and then you find out you have a
Yes.
major health problem,
Exactly.
you could require surgery for 200 grand or,
Mhm.
so I look at it that way that, and I'm a business owner myself now, here at Phillips Lytle, and it's a good way to do business is to periodically take stock and make sure that you're compliance, law firms included.
Absolutely. One thing that you said earlier that I'd like to highlight, you mentioned employee handbooks.
Yep.
And something that you alluded to was, there being a separate version of the handbook for New York State-based employees. For people who are listening who may not know, is that a requirement that it be a separate handbook? Can they, put everything in one document that's just got call outs for New York-based employees? How does that have to work?
Sure, good question. There is no statutory requirement that there be a separate handbook. It is totally permissible to have a single handbook with call outs. And what I typically see is if it's section 7 is on leaves of absence for your employees, you will then have a section 7.1 that is for New York employees. The issue I see with that, and it's not really a legal one, is if your employees happen to be reading their handbook, which I know is always an exciting read for the employees, they will notice that, hey, these New York employees have this extra thing, and it can lead to questions. And so, if you can afford it, it may be best to have a separate handbook for your New York employees. In fact, it may be beneficial to have entirely separate legal entities, LLCs or what have you, for your New York operations. And that sometimes justifies the spend of an additional employee handbook for New York. If you're already investing in a whole new LLC or incorporated company for New York, the handbook ad is not a heavy lift. And that does keep some separation. Now, the truth is that because of the pay transparency law, your Pennsylvania employers are going to see, when you advertise for positions, they are going to see what the expected pay rate is for those positions. And in New York, that law applies even to internal job postings. And it is not limited to positions in or folks who live in New York. If the position is going to provide services or do work in New York State, and even if it's outside of New York State but will report to someone in New York, that job posting needs to have a salary. So once you're expanding into New York, or even really thinking about it, you're going to have to start putting your salary ranges in your advertisements for jobs. And it's natural that your employees will see what is being offered, and they'll compare their notes to what they're receiving. And you may have to evaluate your pay scales, particularly because of the pay equity issue.
Yes, that was actually going to be a question of mine, because with the pay equity issue, and there is a pretty substantial difference in compensation requirements and requirements, let's say, and competitiveness for employers in New York State compared to employers in Pennsylvania. And that is also a very common area that we have, talked about with clients that we do business with, and they're shocked at the difference. So I'm just curious, what would you say to an employer who might be saying, well, you know what, the employees in Pennsylvania, they won't know, but yeah, so we have to hire someone, and pay them substantially more out of New York State. The employees won't talk. There's nothing we need to worry about. And it's for the same position. Can you just kind of react to that from a compliance perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's wishful thinking that they're not going to talk or notice or have a gripe about that. I also think that if we are, even though we're complying with the market demands and the cost of living and the differences in rent and overhead in New York, and that is accounting for the higher salary we're offering, that all may be true. But the reality is that if you are reaching into New York to hire folks at a inflated rate compared to Pennsylvania folks, and you happen to hire folks in New York who are, for example, white males, only white males, and your Pennsylvania employees who are earning less for the same job are not white males, right? Say that they are black females. That standing alone creates an inference that you are having discriminatory pay practices and could be liable under New York's pay equity laws. And even though you truly had no discriminatory intent, right? And even though you hire me, I can defend you and say, no, judge, this had nothing to do with race or gender. This was based on the market. And we may win that, but you'd have to pay to defend that. And you'd have to go through the 2 or 3 years of a litigation defending that public lawsuit. And so the questions that I deal with clients on a fairly regular basis are not always what's legal and illegal. There's other factors that need to be considered, because even though something may be legally justifiable, it does not mean that there's no risk involved.
Sure.
And the risk of a claim being brought or the optics of it. And so anytime you're reaching into New York and paying people more, you're going to want to audit your interview practices and the demographics, as well as the hiring, right? If you're only interviewing or hiring a particular class of people, it's going to look like that was or is having a discriminatory impact on your Pennsylvania employees. So something to keep in mind that does happen and does happen with a fair amount of regularity.
I think that's really good advice, and that's something that we've encouraged listeners to do across multiple different episodes now, is to really take a very close look at their entire hiring process, to identify, from a process perspective, where are we falling short. But I think you bring up an excellent point in, where may there be certain biases or tendencies inherent within the process that need to be addressed and corrected.
Right. So trying to be sensitive to time. I know we could talk for hours.
We could. It's a huge topic for sure.
I want to ask just one last question.
Sure.
Because we have employers of all different sizes, industries, some of them nonprofit, listening. So if you could leave our listeners who are Pennsylvania employers with one piece of advice, because I'm going to be honest, probably a lot of people are listening to this thinking, I'm too small or I'm a nonprofit. That's great, but much of this doesn't apply to me. So if you could maybe leave our listeners with the most important tidbit of something to leave them thinking about doing differently, what would it be?
That's a great question. I think I could talk for days about this issue. I would say for the folks listening, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know, don't guess. And the only way to find out what you don't know is to ask. And you got to ask somebody who has experience with that. And that's really the big takeaway that I would hope to impart upon your listeners today, is that you'd be surprised the types of laws that New York has and the types of areas that are covered by rules and regulations here in New York. Can't tell you how many times I have PA employers or other states employers say to me, come on, you can't be serious. That's really a law. And I have to say, yeah, it is. And, New York has a very, very pro-employee stance. They have issued decrees that say specifically that these laws must be interpreted to the highest benefit to the employee and shall be interpreted liberally. And, with that in mind, I think it's important to know that you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know, don't guess. Best way to stay out of trouble.
Absolutely. So I just want to underline, bold, highlight, circle,
All of the things.
all the things. If you are listening to this, if you're a Pennsylvania employer with even just one employee, don't put it off. Don't hope for the best. Don't assume that if I don't ask and therefore don't know, then I'll be, protected from having to worry about such things. Because one of my favorite sayings is, it's never a problem until it is. In other words, it's not a matter of if, it is eventually going to be a matter of when, right? So seek advice from qualified counsel, talk to trusted professionals with expertise in New York State.
Yes.
And I know a lot of our listeners have awesome, really, really lovely trusted advisors in Pennsylvania. And I'm not saying to replace those advisors.
No.
I'm just saying to add to your circle of trusted advisors, definitely you want to talk to people from New York State.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask that question when you're working with, whether it's, an attorney, an accountant, whatever.
Payroll providers.
Ask the question specifically. Don't make that assumption, because we all know what happens when you assume.
It's true. And I've heard, there are examples of payroll processing organizations and benefit brokerage organizations who are based out of Pennsylvania, who our clients have been working with for years. And when we are walking alongside them, helping them out with a certain HR issue or what have you, lo and behold, the payroll processing organization nor the benefit, brokerage organization had anyone who even knew to advise them about some of these things that you're speaking of. So I think it's definitely good to always add to your toolkit.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Ask the questions, build your team, and make sure you're building it with people who are covering all of your bases as far as where your business or organization is currently operating. And also, to your point from earlier, Jim, I think if there are eventual future plans, there's no time like the present to start doing some pre-planning work and having those conversations early on. So then again, to your point, you're not finding yourself in a real sticky situation after you've already started hiring or locating the organization or some of your team in New York State. So for sure. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you being a guest with us today and going through this, just kind of the tip of the iceberg of this incredibly complex topic. So again, Jim O'Connor from Phillips Lytle joining us today for this episode 15 of the Aha Moment. So exciting that we're 15 episodes in. And thank you to our listeners. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify if you have not done that yet. Our episodes drop every other week, so make sure you get up-to-date news on the latest episodes as they go live. Additionally, you can follow us on LinkedIn at Decision Associates. We are also decisionassociates.net for our website, so feel free to check us out there and learn a little bit more about us. And otherwise, we will catch you on our next episode.
There is two other special guests we forgot to say thank you to, and that would be our guest, window washers.
Yes.
Let's hear
Thank you,
the window washers.
The window washers.
They did a great job.
Keeping those windows clean.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you both.
Thanks again,
you, Jim.
Thank you.